Hello everyone, today we are talking about the digestive system. The digestive system is basically a hollow tube or tract from your mouth to your anus. Food enters through the mouth, gets processed, nutrients are absorbed, and then it exits out the anus. There are 4 phases. The first is ingestion, where food is taken into the body. The next is digestion, that begins in the mouth and is basically where food is broken into smaller pieces. Then we have absorption, where the nutrients are actually absorbed into various parts of the body. And finally, excretion, where a solid waste is removed from the body. When we're talking about digestion, there are 2 different types. The first is mechanical. When we say mechanical, what it means is breaking down food through sort of movement or crushing. So mainly this happens by the teeth, but the stomach also breaks down food by churning and moving the food around. Chemical digestion, on the other hand, involves acids or enzymes. Oops, there's a little typo there. We have chemical digestion starting in the mouth. The salivary glands of the mouth release enzymes, one example of which is amylase, and amylase helps to break down different starches. There's also lingual lipase, which helps to break down lipids or fats. So those are 2 examples of enzymes that exist in the digestive system. We might get into a few more examples later on. There are a number of organs associated with the digestive system. We've already talked about the mouth. There's the esophagus, the stomach, and the intestines. There are also the accessory organs, and so these are the ones that sort of produce different components required to make the other components of the digestive tract work effectively. So as we've talked about, the first place where sort of the function of the digestive system starts is the mouth. So what happens is we have ingestion of food occurring at the mouth, where you put food into the body. Then digestion begins to occur. So we use our teeth to masticate, which means sort of break up the food, and we use the enzymes in our saliva to also chemically break down the food. So using your teeth, your tongue, and the saliva, you actually create what's called a bolus of food, or a little lump of food, which you then swallow. Once you have swallowed this bolus of food, it will move down your esophagus through a movement called peristalsis. What this means is that there's sort of coordinated muscle contractions that go down the esophagus and force this bolus of food down. This peristalsis is completely involuntary, which just means your brain tells your body to do it, or your esophagus to do it, without your conscious mind ever really being aware of it happening. Peristalsis also occurs in the small intestine as well as the large intestine. You may notice that I said it's through muscle contraction that sort of forces this to happen. Recall that it's smooth muscle. So from the esophagus, the bolus goes into the stomach. Separating the esophagus from the stomach is what's called the esophageal sphincter, which is basically a group of muscles that can open or close, preventing sort of movement between the 2 spaces, the esophagus and the stomach. When this sphincter opens when it shouldn't, it can cause what's known as acid reflux. So once in the stomach, we have mechanical digestion, when the stomach mixes and turns the food, as well as chemical digestion. As we've discussed before, we have hydrochloric acid in our stomach. There are also a number of enzymes that help to break down the food. Different enzymes are able to break down different types of molecules, whether we're talking about lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, whatever it is. Pepsin is one of the main digestive enzymes in the stomach, and pepsin helps to break down proteins. The hydrochloric acid I mentioned also helps to sort of break down proteins. We would say that it denatures proteins. Now you may remember that acids are corrosive. Well, the epithelial cells of the stomach that line the stomach secrete a mucus that helps protect the cells from its own acid. So before we had the bolus moving through the digestive system, now that it has passed through the stomach, it becomes the chyme. In the intestines, the chyme is continued to be digested. So again, there are many enzymes that break down the proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. Here's a good time to mention some of those accessory organs. The liver has a number of functions. One is to sort of filter blood. It also helps to metabolize drugs, and it also creates and secretes bile. This bile is stored in the gallbladder before traveling through the bile duct and into the small intestine. Bile is really important to help sort of process and digest the fats in this chyme. You may notice that the pancreas is also mentioned in this image. The pancreas is an organ that helps to release digestive enzymes into the small intestine. So again, these digestive enzymes help to break down carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. And those are the main macromolecules. The other interesting thing about the pancreas is the organ that produces insulin. Insulin is what regulates how much glucose is floating around your bloodstream. So when the hormone insulin is also floating around your bloodstream, it tells cells to let the sugar into the cells. What this means is that when people either don't produce insulin or have issues with the insulin receptors on the cells, it means that they can get very high blood sugar levels, which is not good for you. And so, of course, some of you may know that this is diabetes. If we were to take sort of a cross-section of the intestines under the microscope, we would see what is known as villi, and on those villi are microvilli. What these villi and microvilli do are essentially increase the surface area of the intestines. That allows the intestines to absorb as much nutrients as possible at the same time. Once these nutrients travel through the cells, they then enter the blood vessels, which can then carry the nutrients around the body. The small intestine can actually be broken up into three parts: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. In the duodenum, which receives the chyme from the stomach, we have sort of a basic mucus that exists that acts to neutralize that hydrochloric acid coming from the stomach. This is also the part of the intestine that receives the gastric juices from the pancreas, which is to say the digestive enzymes, and the bile from the, gallbladder/liver. The jejunum is the portion that has those villi and the portion where most of the absorption of nutrients occurs. The ileum also contains villi, and there's also absorption occurring here, but it's slightly different than the absorption that occurs at the jejunum. From here, we move on to the large intestine. The ileum connects to the cecum of the large intestine. The function of the large intestine is to primarily absorb water. All of the nutrients have been absorbed in the small intestine, and at the large intestine, we're sort of recuperating any water that was put into the bolus and the chyme. The colon can be broken up into different parts: the ascending colon, which just means going up, the transverse colon, which sort of just means to extend across, and the descending colon, which means to go down. And finally, the sigmoid colon, which just sort of has a little S shape. The large intestine is known as the large intestine not because of the length of the intestine, but instead because of the diameter of the tubing, for lack of a better word. Finally, the waste, which it is waste at this point, will enter the rectum for temporary storage. The anus has two sphincters: the internal anal sphincter, which is made of smooth muscles, and it has an involuntary contraction, which means we have no control over it. Thankfully, the external anal sphincter is made of skeletal muscle, which we do have voluntary control over, which means, control over our own bladder, which is a good thing in life, I'd say. So as the food has reached the end of the digestive system, so too have you reached the end of our lesson. Good luck!